right. Is this microphone, can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, after that lovely presentation, hopefully you all are ready to just sit down and think and fall asleep now. I know I was thinking, like, how do I go after that? That's gonna be, I don't have dice. My name's Paul. I use he, him pronouns. I am a psychoanalytic psychotherapist, also a professor of counseling psychology at the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. So I'm coming at this and wanting to talk to you all a little bit about this idea of looking at board games in particular through a psychoanalytic lens. So that's a little bit of kind of where we're headed today. So the title, Lacan Plays Catan, is just, I have always wanted to give a talk called that because I just thought it's just sitting there right there ready for it. Lacan, we'll get to in a second, but is the analytic thinker I'm going to be building a lot of my theory on today. So where we're headed is, I just want to talk a little bit about like why I'm interested in games, why board games. And there's some of it's a little bit obvious here at the Board Game Academics Conference, but I'm used to having to defend myself and why I talk about games at academic conferences, so that's just going to have to be part of it. And then I'll give you a little bit of like Lacanian theory. I will warn you, Lacan was like purposely and obnoxiously hard to understand. So if some of this is like, I just rolled dice and I'd rather think about rules and constraints, like go there in your minds, I'll do my best to keep it interesting. And then we'll talk a little bit about this concept of play from a therapeutic standpoint. Of like what is happening with play, why does it matter, and then end with a couple implications for you all. I will say in planning this, kind of thinking through, it was hard to sort of consider, like I'm used to speaking more towards like psychologists or to mental health practitioners and sort of have a like much more diverse group of thinkers here. Please feel free to interrupt me if I sort of gloss over something and you're like, can we go back? Because I'm not used to people talking like that. That would be helpful for me if you wouldn't mind me willing to do that. So I'm going to start with just sort of my own experience. I love a lot of Cole Wehrle's games, and so I was playing John Company a couple months ago, and there was that moment where what I love about this game, it's a semi-cooperative game. For those of you that don't know it, you all sort of play as family members of British families who were involved in the British East India Company. And so it's got this semi-cooperative element. And the game does a lot of really fascinating things. But in this moment, I was in a position where not out of the blue, I was able to suddenly tank the company and basically just like ruin everybody else's chance of winning. And it was one of those moments where I was playing with my friends and I could feel literally the adrenaline surging through my body as I was about to make that move. And I was about to reveal that I had been planning on tanking this the entire time and that I had been basically doing the whole trader mechanic the entire time. And what strikes me is that that aspect of the game is like right in the front. It's like on the box. There's an informed consent about the game due to not just the theme, but also the fact that this is how it invites you to be with each other, is to kind of stab each other in the back. And yet, even with all of that in there, what I felt in my body was so strong. And so it always gets me, why is it that something as silly as like even just now rolling dice, I felt emotionally invested in a game that was pure chance? Why is so much of my body, so much of my mind, my affective world, how does it capture it, even when I know it's, quote, just a game? What's going on here? So this is a little bit of like some of the thinking I want to sort of analyze, because I think when we can start wrestling with some of those questions of what else is happening, what if there's more going on, that we can start looking at some of the more psychological elements going on in a game and use them for more than just play or even teaching. I don't say that to diminish that part of games, but to actually explore them in some therapeutic and self-reflective spaces. So in games, I mean, the question is, why do we care so much? Why does it suddenly matter? Why are friendships ended? Why are tables overturned? Why have we all been at places where like, I'm not playing with you anymore? Like, why does that happen? And of course, as much as they can be these sort of table flipping moments, there are also these beautiful moments of coming together. And I think this is part of what brings a lot of us back, is that sometimes you're playing a game and something transcendent almost takes place there. This is like we get elevated to some other place. So I want to explore a little bit of what's going on there because of these real emotions that happen despite it's just a game. Despite the fact that it's just a game. And so with that, I want to play with this idea of that games offer us what I'm going to call a nested reality. They take our world with all of its complexities and they give us another one, another reality to play in, another language we're going to talk about in a second too, in order to interact with, which means all of our affect and our emotional and the complexities of who we are outside get transposed into this game, but within its world, within its language. in some really fascinating ways. So, to do this, of course, we're going to start with some Freud and psychoanalytic theory, who, of course, when you say one thing but you mean your mother, is what we're going to be listening for in this. Now, I'm also often, on top of having to defend myself as a board gamer in academic settings, I'm also usually having to defend myself as a psychoanalytic thinker in modern settings. So there's a lot of misconceptions about Freud, and there's a lot of true things about Freud, so I'm not here to be an apologist for him, but to just say, when I say psychoanalytic theory, here's what I'm trying to emphasize. This is what I'm trying to mean. Psychoanalytic theory emphasizes the significance of the unconscious, of the unthinkable, and we'll get to what I mean by that in a second. And so in that sense, it circles around this question, what if there's more? Yes, you felt that. Yes, that's the story you told yourself about why you did that. Yes, that's the way you would name it. But what if there's more going on? And so in that sense, when I'm talking about psychoanalytic theory, I just invite you to approach it very playfully with that question of just being an openness to what if there's more happening? Can we find the least worst way to talk about that more? And that's what psychoanalysis offers me, at least. So it's not just couches and Oedipus. That's there, but I'm not going to say it's not there, but that's not all it is. So first off, so when I say unconscious, and this again is just to clarify, because a lot of times people use language like the subconscious, so we talk about implicit processes and things like that. The unconscious, from particularly the Lacanian standpoint I'm going to be bringing, is not just things that you can't think right now. It's that which is unsymbolizable. It's that which cannot be thought. It is the unthinkable. So, to go back to Freud, Freud talked about you have your conscious, your preconscious, and those are both within the realm of things that you can think. So self-help is great at making something that might be preconscious, you haven't thought it yet, thinkable. And I know you're thinking that. The unconscious, though, is so disturbing, it's unthinkable. You can't self-reflect to your unconscious. It requires an other, somebody else, to help us engage with our own unconscious. A lot of times when you have those really helpful aha moments, those are great, but you're still actually interacting with your own preconscious, because that was thinkable to you, okay? Instead, it is revealed in slips and dreams and jokes. Lacan, as I'll get to in a second, talks about how the unconscious is always speaking. It's always speaking through us. But it speaks in that gap between what you think you said and what you actually said. What you think you're trying to communicate and what everybody else is hearing. This is what makes speaking in front of a large group of people so terrifying, is that I have an idea of what I hope you're hearing in me, and you're hearing a whole lot of more about me than I intend. You all have picked up a lot more about me than I intended. And in many ways, that's beautiful. It's also terrifying. And that's why, as I have there, oh, I love laser pointers, requires an other to metabolize. So Lacan, then, is the one we're going to bring in a little bit, and he argues that the unconscious actually is structured like a language, and which means that, it means a lot of things, but he was really emphasizing the significance of us being linguistic beings, and that consciousness, he argues, comes out of the fact that we are caught up within language. So this gets really fascinating when we talk about games as a language. If games become their own language and then we start playing them, that means, again, in this nested reality way, we're being caught up in a whole nother way of being. And our unconscious is going to then speak through that language. In the same way it speaks through English or whatever sort of kind of other social languages we have today. So a couple things about Lacan, and again, in brief, there'll be a short quiz later, but that's it. Only public shaming for those who don't pass. So it's fine. No, that's a joke. Okay. So Lacan argues about a couple things, and I'll try not to get lost because I love talking about this stuff. But one of the things that Lacan argues specifically is that instead of this idea of that being like a core nugget of who you are down deep in your soul, Lacan says down deep in your soul, you're more like a vase, which is an emptiness with a structure around it. The emptiness has meaning because of the structure around it. So at our core, what it means to be human actually is to lack. And that is actually wonderful. Because it's in that lack, in that not having, that we desire, that we strive, that we move towards. Activity, action, thinking, talking, loving happens because there's an incompleteness, a sense of not all the way there, a lack that fuels us. So in that, he says desire is this huge aspect in his thinking, and he spends a lot of time sort of unpacking desire, which I'll do in a little bit, because that's what games capture for us. Even though all we were doing was just rolling dice and silly activity. Suddenly my desire was involved. I cared that I got rated. If you had simply said, roll the dice and count how many times you got that number, doesn't mean anything, but something happens if my desire gets captured in these things. And so, look, one of the things he talks about is how desire actually is less about the thing you think you want, more about the obstacle to getting it. That our desire is actually structured around the obstacles towards our achievement than it is about what you think you want. Now, this is part of why I love games so much, because we think we play a game, or often we tell ourselves a story that we're playing to win. But when somebody wins, the game's over. That's actually the point at which the fun stops. Desire is most alive in the middle of it. Games are actually, and I'll get to the Bernard Suits quote in a second, about actually rules that prevent you from winning. And so the actual fun comes from not having, still being in a position of lacking. Okay. Sorry, I get ahead of myself. And then the other thing we're going to hit on is he talks about these three registers. So he breaks down reality, and I'll try to be quick in this, as we experience into these three registers of the imaginary, the symbolic, and then the real. The real being more of the unconscious, that which can't be metabolized. The imaginary is more closest to your conscious, what you think you're doing, the images we see. The symbolic being the rules. I'll explain those in a second. So time is going fast. A couple things here that I'll lack. Realize I normally do a whole, 3-credit course on this. Okay, 30 minutes, that'll be great. 10 minutes per credit, it'll be fine. Okay, so he uses the dollar sign, actually, and he loved to draw themes and mathematic equations, but he used the dollar sign to indicate the subject, which he has is split. Dollar sign because it's an S for subject, but it's split down the middle. You are not fully yourself. When you filled out your social media profile or your pick to kind of describe yourself in different places, that's one aspect of you, but there's always more to you. We're never fully who we think we are. Which again, the very basis of why most people go to therapy is, I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know why I'm feeling this. I don't know why this keeps happening. It's as if there's an other within me. We have lots of songs about the stranger within and things like that. And so Lacan argues that our ego then is a fundamental misrecognition. You develop that sense of self, that I that you have, from other people seeing you, from the infant being held by the caregiver and being seen. So we imagine who we are from the outside. He talks about this, what he calls the mirror stage. When you see yourself in the mirror, you think you're seeing yourself, but you're seeing yourself from the outside, which means you're seeing yourself as a fully complete package deal, as opposed to the messy blob of mixed up feelings and implicit and all these other aspects that we actually are. So there's always something that's kept out. It's a fundamental misrecognition. In the same way, like in a game, you're going to be represented by something. Whether it's your little avatar, or whether it's your components, or just scrolls on a paper, there's some way you're going to be represented in the game. And that's important because it helps you be a part of the game. But that's a reduction of you. The little avatar, the little characters can't fully express the fullness of who you are. But you do need them in order to interact in the game world. In the same way we require an ego in order to walk around. I need to have a way of thinking of myself as Paul to stand up here, to imagine that I have something to say to you all. But if I reduce myself to just, I'm the person that speaks on this stuff, I'm missing so much more of the complexity of who I am. And so he invites us into this tension of always open to the fact that who you think you are is only part of the story. We want to be open to this more. And so that lack within us is what keeps us continually talking, continually listening, continually growing, and most importantly, I would argue, continuing to love one another. Because out of love, we desire, we want to connect with somebody else. I don't just mean romantic or sexual love in sort of many of its forms. And so lack in this way is both structural, there's no way around it, but instead of it being a problem, it's actually quite generative. If you start the game from the position of I've already won, the game's over. If you start with having achieved everything you think you're supposed to have, there's nowhere to go. I do couples therapy at times, or other sort of working with families, and relationships and partnerships end when you get to a point where you're like, well, I know everything there is to know about you. It's boring. When passion and desire is gone, when there isn't a continually move towards one another, which the flip side of moving towards and the enjoyment of each other is that there's a lack. I don't know everything there is to know about you. I'm learning more about my partner. I'm learning more about the people in my life and the people I care about. So the question is, how do we engage with this more of who we are, ourselves, and with who we are collectively in one another? So this brings us to desire. So Desire, always a little bit more complicated, because it's psychoanalysis. It likes to make everything more complicated than we think. So Freud started, and you may be familiar with his pleasure principle, that human motivation is oriented around maximizing our pleasure and minimizing our discomfort. Lacan comes along, and actually Freud didn't even agree with himself later on, because he argued about what's beyond the pleasure principle, which a lot of, Lacan came and sort of worked on more of later Freud that said, actually that's only true to an extent. Your ego, the story you tell yourself, functions that way. But the other within you is actually oriented by what Lacan calls enjoyment. The French word he used actually is jouissance, which is a form of pain and pleasure. It's a pushing into limits. Going back to when you play a game, the energy and the feeling of like the life energy, you feel most alive when you're playing. When it isn't decided who's won. When you're in the midst of the struggle. When you actually achieve what you want, if you actually accidentally win, there's a, okay. It's a sigh, it's a depressive moment. So Freud noted how pleasure is actually somewhat depressing. It's a sigh. Whereas enjoyment, when we're struggling, when you're resisting something, when you're in the heat of something, that's actually where the life energy comes in. That's where the excitation increases the most. And so what they argued is actually, while we are consciously oriented around things that we think will give us pleasure, we are unconsciously, and the more motivationally significant aspect is our enjoyment. We tell ourselves all sorts of reasons why we want to play a game, but really it's because you want to struggle towards winning. You want to push against a limit. You want to break it. You want to struggle against somebody else. You want to have an obstacle that's fun to play with. So in this sense, enjoyment here is going to be unconscious. It's going to lead to an increase in energy. It is motivationally significant, despite the narrative or the fantasy that we tell ourselves. It's more motivationally significant. And in that sense, it's driven by the obstacle to our pleasure, to what we think we want. What's important here is to realize, so when I talk about desire, I don't just mean an urge for a thing. Desire, then, is actually the fuel that pushes you to start seeking in the first place. Desire is about the search, not about attainment. Whereas I've written elsewhere, humans, we more require something to pursue than something to attain. And so I mentioned I was going to do the Bernard suits, which I assume you all are familiar with, that games are, one definition is a voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. And I like this for simplicity's sake to argue, to look around this idea that actually when we play a game, it's not about the thing we think we want, it's actually about the unnecessary obstacles. That's why we keep coming back to games, because we want to wrestle with those obstacles. So our conscious goal, as I mentioned, may be to win. Our unconscious investment, though, is going to be all around the drama that comes up, the obstacles that come up, the recognition, the more that's played out, that gets in the way of getting just the simple victory, the simple I win. Okay, almost done with Lacanian theory. I will get there in a second. The last thing I mentioned is Lacan breaks reality down into these three registers, and this is what it is relevant. I think it's so. Bear with me for a second. Slavoj Žižek actually uses chess to teach on this. He talks about it. He talks about how the imaginary register is the theme of the game. In chess, medieval combat, that we are generals or kings or whatever fighting each other. The symbolic, though, is the rules of the game. What makes chess chess are the rules. Chess has been reimagined as Peanuts characters. It's been reimagined as Star Wars characters. It's been reimagined in a bunch of different ways. But as long as pawns move in a certain way and the end is still checkmating the king, it's still chess. This becomes important because we imagine ourselves to be all sorts of different people. Yet our lives are also structured then by the rules that you can't quite see, but they give meaning to the image. Me standing in front of a room with all of you sitting there means something because the rules of this is that this is now our unconscious aspects. Because again, it's what's unthinkable, what's unspeakable in there. So, what does this have to do with play? Yes?
Sorry, quick question.
Please.
Will then be what we might call as board game play or as game players the meta, or is that something different?
Yeah, no, we might call it the meta.
Okay.
Yeah, and sort of, it's everything else happening. Is it that's going on around it? Yeah, everything that the game doesn't have a way to make sense of. I often think of it because I'm in the sort of Sisyphusian quest to get my kids to be gamers as well, and so like sometimes I'm playing just to help them love the game more, and sometimes I'm playing with my friends. But it totally changes the game. So Play then is this from a therapeutic standpoint. So here I'm borrowing off of another analyst named Donald Winnicott, who actually argues that all psychotherapy actually comes down to being a form of play. Psychotherapy is you are playing with your patients. And that where somebody isn't able to play, therapy is about cultivating their capacity for play. And that he argues that play itself is therapeutic. Because what play does is it opens up a transitional and potential space for growth. You get into this as if space. So when children are playing, I've got a 10-year-old son, when he picks up a stick and runs around and starts swinging it around, the fact that it's a stick is important because it looks kind of like a lightsaber, and that's what he's imagining. But it's also really important that it's not a lightsaber, because now he can whack things and have fun whacking things. Whereas if it was a lightsaber, it would be terrifying. So it has to hold this in-between space. In games, we see this where we want the components to be real or kind of bring us into the theme, but also it's really important that we're not actually killing each other. It's important that we're not actually, the games provide this container where I can stab my friends in the back in a game, but because I wouldn't actually do that in real life. It provides a place where that side of me that wants to be kind of competitive and a little bit of a tool is able to come out so I can listen to it. Provides that space instead of just denying and saying that's never me. And so when we're in a game, we're speaking a new language. And that becomes a container for us to be able to encounter these unthinkable sides of ourselves that we otherwise are too threatening to experience in real life. And so because games provide this nested reality, as I said, it provides a way for that to be expressed, to be thought about, and for us to then be able to wrestle with it and learn from it instead of deny it. So in that sense, I would argue games are a wonderful site for unconscious engagement. Sometimes it's terrifying to play a game because you don't realize why you just did that, or you couldn't believe that you were the person that just did that. Or I'll play groups and one partner will look at the other and be like, I didn't know you were the kind of person who could lie so well. Right? Something gets evoked in us. And what games can provide, if we're in, again, of course, a safe enough environment, right? There are obviously some real game groups and game experiences that can go real negative. And I would argue because there's an actual very personal element of ourselves that's getting expressed. It's not simply light and silly. No, this is deep. There's a lot of deep aspects of who we are that are getting played out. And so if we are willing to listen to how our desire is captured, why was I so invested in that game of John Company that I was visibly shaking? I don't remember who won the game. But I remember that moment. It was much more about something else going on. So if we're open to being curious about those times, perhaps then we can actually use games not just therapeutically to express something, which again is good, but to actually learn more about each other. The other thing to remember, you can't access your own unconscious directly. Games bring us to, games at least that aren't solo, bring us to interact with somebody else. And so if we can use games actually to foster more discussion and group reflection, they become a beautiful way to understand who we are and who we're playing with a little bit better. So in conclusion here, some of the implications then, and I apologize for how quickly I've sort of had to rush through some of these things, is that, so for those of you that kind of are in more of the mental health world, there is already kind of obviously a long tradition of play therapy and of using games in therapeutic contexts and things like that, and I think that's beautiful. What I want to add to that discussion is that a lot of those look at the themes and the symbols that kids use in like sand tray and other forms of play to interpret that, and I don't think that that's wrong. I think that can be really helpful. But I think what Lacan brings in here is to say, what if we noticed the structure and the rules, the mechanics of what they're doing, not just the themes of what they're playing with. And so if we can look at games as encounters with lack, as opportunities to see how unconscious desire is playing out. Not just that the kid wanted to take the two toys and smash them together, but also what's happening in the way that I am structured, that they are structured, how the mechanics of what we're doing actually play itself out. And so that can open up sites to listen for play in the same way that we listen for slips of the tongue or associations in a patient's speech. We can listen for the way what their play is revealing associatively. And then for those of you who are not in the mental health world, sort of not in the sort of therapeutic implications, I would just encourage you with this to not just in your game, well, one, to do game debriefs, because I think that's one of my favorite parts. The most beautiful times in the game is like just talking through what happened, turning it into something that makes sense. In that, not just why did you make that move, but how did it feel when you make that move? How did you imagine this was going to happen? Notice your affect. Where were you frustrated? Where did you find yourself feeling something even though you kind of wish you weren't, or you kept having to tell yourself this is just a game, but it's something else kept arising? When did you feel your energy rise? When did you lose your interest in it? When was it back? What else might be happening? Be curious about your own internal world throughout the game, not just like the quality of your strategic decisions. That's a part of it, but what if the blunders in your game are like the slips of your tongue? What if your mistakes you make actually speak to some of your own unconscious desire playing out? And so the last thing, when did winning matter to you? Or when did it stop mattering? When did you develop a new win condition? You know, that always happens when somebody realizes they're not going to win, so they're going to like take down that one other person. What's playing out there? What else might be happening there? So, just some brief implications for you all, just to consider how games themselves as a language, sort of building off of what Wittgenstein said about how language itself is always a game. Games themselves are a language. And in that, our unconscious is speaking through them, if we're open to listening. With also the quick caveat, not all game groups are safe enough to do that. And so make sure that we're paying attention to what else is happening around us and paying attention to boundaries. So, with that, thank you. And if you have any questions,
Say your name again. Tell everyone your name again.
Oh, yes, my name is Paul Hoard. Thank you. Sorry. And we need to move on to the next person, right? Okay, great. I am on.